That's the message. Heaven is real right now, and God's throne is there. Number two, look at verse 2. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. Wow. Who's on the throne? Well, people, we talk about Jesus seated at the right hand of the throne, the majesty on high. When you see God, you're seeing Jesus. But when you don't see God sitting on the throne, it's God the Father. Because he is a spirit, and the throne, God doesn't have a body. Theologically, he's non-corporeal. He is a spirit. He's an infinite spirit. He is also omnipresent spirit. He's not localized. But when he's manifested in a visible form, walking around, talking to people, most often it's Jesus. Now, I'm sure I heard Mark Strout. I love coming in for his class. There's a lot of discussion whether Genesis 18 is the whole Trinity. When Abraham has 3 visitors who are talking, saying, what are we going to do about Sodom? So there are times that it is possible that there are theophanies, not just Christophanies. Christophany is when Jesus shows up in the Old Testament, like the angel of the Lord. A theophany would be when God has some kind of a form. So, and I'm not teaching Old Testament theology, but what Jesus wanted them and us to see is that God is seated on the throne. And all is well and all is calm, just like it says in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus references over and over and over when he's talking to people worrying about what they're going to eat the next day. He said, why are you all troubled when your Father who is in heaven is seated on the throne? So we're going to come back to that. Now look at the throne passages. This is the book of Revelation. Chapter 1, the throne's mentioned once. Chapter 2, twice. Chapter 3, twice. Chapter 4, off the charts. We're talking about this is and for people that repeatedly read the Bible, you start seeing things like this. If you want to know about the throne of God, it's throne, 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 all the way through the chapter. So it becomes, for people that are looking for the key chapter on any topic, it becomes the most important chapter. Then chapter 5, there are only 5 references, 6, 1, 7, back up to 7 references, 8, 1, not at all in 9. 9 is a horrible chapter. It's about when Apollyon, the destroyer, and his demon monsters get set loose. In chapter 10, not. And 11, 1, 12, 1, 13, you see him going on through, and then it gets heavy when we get near the ending. But what is our Father on the throne like? Well, for just a minute, look at Matthew 5, because I want you to see in the Sermon on the Mount how Jesus describes the one seated on the throne. Our Father is the one seated on the throne, starting in verse 16. Jesus says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So, good. Number 2, he says in verse 34, so we're supposed to glorify him. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is what? What does verse 34 say heaven is? God's throne. People, they wonder what heaven's like. Heaven is God's throne. It's where our Father is seated. It's what we're going to study today. It's amazing. Look at verse 45. That you may be sons of your Father in heaven. What does he do from his throne? He makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. Did you know that God, the scriptures tell us, Colossians 1 tells us that God, through Jesus Christ, holds the universe together? There is a lot, nuclear physicists and theoretical astrophysicists and all the people at MIT and Caltech and all the great thinkers of the world still have not solved the very basic question. We know that like charges repel, right? You remember that from high school chemistry. So how do atoms stay together when they have like charged particles at the nucleus? If they repel, why don't they repel? Well, because Colossians 1 says that by him all things hold together. So what happens when God stops holding everything together? Oh, that's 2 Peter chapter 3. It says the whole universe dissolves. It melts. That's actually what it says. Peter says the universe melts with a fervent heat. So God, who through Christ created the world in Genesis, in Revelation between chapter 20 and 21 is 2 Peter 3, the events. And he uncreates the universe, and it just dissolves. So heaven is his throne. Look at verse 48. It says, therefore you should be perfect just like your Father in heaven is perfect. Wow. So we learned about him, in verse 16 that we're supposed to glorify him. And, he's seated and his throne is heaven, and now he's perfect. So, and if you keep going in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. Do you know what that's implying? He's watching everything we do. Wow. Keep going to verse 4. Your charitable deeds may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. This is the one Joseph knew about when Joseph told Potiphar's wife, I can't do that because God is watching. Boy, Joseph had a very practical understanding of the scriptures. Look at verse 6 of Matthew 6. When you pray in your room and when you've shut your door, pray to your Father he's not just seeing and watching. Look what it says. He is in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. This Father is amazing, but it gets even better in verse 8 of chapter 6. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him. He is a really good Father. There's that song, you're a good, good Father, and that's who you are. That's who you are. Yeah, boy, that's a nice song, but boy, the truth of the scriptures is something that we should think about. That's who's seated on that throne. But look, the second point there is our Father knows each hop of every bird. It's fun to sit on park benches or benches anywhere and watch the birds. They're very, nervous. They're flittery. They're always, looking in every direction, and they don't stand still very much unless they found something and they're pecking on it. But look at what it says in Matthew chapter 10 about birds, starting in verse 29. I'll start in 28 since I underlined it. Do not fear those who kill the body and cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and body in hell. That's a whammo verse. But verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground. Now that's interesting. That's one of those Greek parts of the text. Actually, it's called a variant. That means that Western manuscripts have one spelling and Eastern manuscripts have another, and I'm sure you have a whole class on that. It could be falls to the ground like the birds are doing in Mexico City because the pollution is so strong. And their little lungs breathe too much of it and it kills them and they fall to the ground. It could be death. But literally, this word, the majority word, is not drops out of the air and dies, it's hops. Every time a bird, they jump up a little bit and they land again. They jump up a little bit and land again. It's interesting that they don't walk. They hop, many of them. Every hop apart from your Father's will. They don't hop unless God continues to give them life. And look what he says. The very hairs of your head are numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. Jesus was big on revealing the Father. In fact, that's the whole purpose of the book of Revelation. Remember, we started way back on day 1, saying that the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God the Father gave to God the Son, to give to John, to give to the churches. Why? Because the more you know about Christ, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the one on the throne. But look at the last line up there. Jesus tells us, doesn't just tell us, Look at chapter 6, verse 9 of Matthew. There are 73 Greek words in this passage, starting in verse 9. In this manner, therefore, pray. By the way, you can look up in your Logos, that is an imperative. That it isn't a suggestion. Jesus said, this is the way I want you to pray. I'm not saying you have 5 options. You're walking down the line at lunch and you don't like French, you'll take Thousand Island. No. This is the manner. He doesn't say the words you're supposed to quote. He said, this is the manner, this is the way, this is the pattern you're supposed to pray. And then he said, this is how to approach our Father. And he gives that beautiful prayer, which starts with, Our Father, which art in heaven. Wow.